Metallica versus Megadeth. Throughout each band's history, the rivalry between the two of them has always been a subject for debate. Who sucks the big one? Who's the bigger sellout? And it's always a matter of opinion. Now, there's fans to this day that will only side with one band and they'll never touch the catalog of the other band, no matter how good the albums might be. There are fans who absolutely hate Dave Mustaine. They think he's nothing more than a jealous dick. And there's, of course, fans who hate Metallica, especially Lars Ulrich, who they see as nothing more than a pretentious prick. Some fans are going to say that Metallica were a bunch of hypocrites for kicking out Dave Mustaine because they were all drinkers and doing drugs at that time. While others will say it was the best thing that happened to the band, besides Cliff Burton, of course. Now, however, there's also a large group of fans like myself who just enjoy both bands. They enjoy the music from both bands. Both bands have had amazing albums throughout their career, and they both have had some misses, according to the critics and fans. So what I will do is a side-by-side comparison of each of the key albums of the band. Now, I repeat, I will not say in this video which album is better. It is really a matter of personal opinion. It's irrelevant what I think about the album. It matters what you think about those albums. But when comparing the albums, I will state the facts about them and talk about the music and the commercial aspects of each album. But you need to also remember, and I'm going to say this at the beginning of the video, is that both bands have made peace and they have reconciled in recent years. But despite the fact that the bands made peace, there's still people that can't let the rivalry die down. So without further ado, let's go over the Metallica versus Megadeth rivalry. Dave Mustaine's time with Metallica was very turbulent at best. While he was a better musician than James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, his behavior didn't seem to fit the mold. Brian Slagel, the owner of Metal Blade Records, the man famous for giving Metallica their first breakthrough in 1982, recalled that Dave was an incredibly talented guy but had an incredibly large problem with alcohol and drugs. He'd get wasted and become a real crazy person, a raging megalomaniac, and the other guys just couldn't deal with that after a while. I mean, they all drank, of course, but Dave drank more, much more, and I could see they were beginning to get fed up of seeing Dave drunk out of his mind all the time. Dave frequently clashed with Hetfield and Ulrich, even caused Ron McGovney, their original bassist, to leave the band because he couldn't deal with Dave anymore. Now, me personally, I know what it's like to see a person you love or a certain person you care about just turn into a complete nasty person when there's alcohol involved or drugs. Especially when they're drunk and belligerent. They are beyond help at that point in their state of mind. And they're so unreasonable that you just get tired of dealing with it. It's not fun. Trust me. I've had plenty of experience with idiots and alcohol. And that is probably what Metallica was feeling at the time. Right before Kill 'Em All was to be recorded in New York City, Metallica finally said, "You're gone," and sent Mustaine on a Greyhound bus back to LA. Dave Mustaine referred to the firing as a no warning, no second chance type of a deal, and it affected him in so many ways. With the band's first efforts, Metallica released Kill 'Em All in 1983, which had songs that still gave Mustaine writing credits. And Megadeth, after forming in 1984, released Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good in 1985. Both of these albums are renowned to this day for their speed and raw power, which pretty much set the metal world on fire and were among the big founders of thrash metal. Within both of these albums is a song with the same main riff and similar structure, Metallica's Four Horsemen and Megadeth's Mechanics, which is considered the original Foreman version. Metallica changed it into Four Horsemen by adding a melodic middle section and made the lyrical subject about the biblical Four Horsemen. In response to this, Dave Mustaine included his version of the Mechanics to, quote, straighten Metallica up, and he made the Mechanics faster because he wanted to make music that was faster and heavier than Metallica. With their second efforts, we have Metallica's Ride the Lightning and Megadeth's Peace Sells in 1984 and 1986, respectively. While Ride the Lightning still has some songs retaining the familiar thrash metal sound, due to the influence of Cliff Burton, who introduced the basics of musical theory to the rest of the band, Metallica broadened their sound by including acoustic guitars, extended instrumentals, and more complex harmonies. Peace Sells still keeps the thrash metal sounds alive, but adds much more maturity to the sound, and being slightly more accessible compared to Killing Is My Business. You have the song Peace Sells, which included a music video that was heavily played on MTV, and essentially gave Megadeth a cult following. And of course, a signature staple of Megadeth, the political lyrics were introduced here, as they wanted to change the public perception of heavy metal by writing songs that contained socially aware lyrics. Both of these albums were groundbreaking at the time, and they expanded the bridge between those who loved the heavy extreme forms and those who were preferring the traditional pop-oriented sounds that were going on at the time. Ride the Lightning and Peace Sells were a response to the glam metal albums at the time. The band's third efforts were Metallica's Master of Puppets in 1986 and Megadeth's So Far So Good So What, released in 1988. Master of Puppets pretty much continues the same musical approach brought in by its predecessor, but it's a lot more refined in sound and manages to get even heavier than before. So Far So Good So What also continues the same approach, while also including their first attempt at a power ballad, which was written in response to the passing of Metallica's Cliff Burton 2 years prior. Now yes, I do realize that Master of Puppets and So Far So Good So What were released 2 years apart, and by the time Megadeth had released their third album, Metallica was already working on their fourth. But like I said, this is a side-by-side comparison of each band's efforts and releases. Now you could say that because Metallica released their first few albums before Megadeth did, you could say that Metallica paved the way for Megadeth to get more followers after Metallica opened the door for a lot of people. But you also got to remember that Dave Mustaine in the 1980s was basically out for blood, and he wanted to one-up Metallica every chance he got. Oh, you're going to make a straightforward thrash metal album? I can do that too, and I can make it faster and heavier than you. Oh wait, you're going to include more harmonics in that? Pfft, not impressed. I can do that too. Oh, your second album peaked at number 100? Ah, well, my second album peaked at number 76. Ha! Beat that, Metallica! Now, in retrospective, Master of Puppets has remained a highly praised, highly influential, and culturally significant album, both critically, from what the fans say. It continues to get featured on all-time lists and was even deemed culturally significant to be preserved in the U.S. National Recording Registry, being the first metal selection to receive this honor. So Far So Good So What? Not so much. Many retrospective reviews of Megadeth's third album don't give the album the same praise as they gave Peace Sells, and they don't see it as influential and as significant. Now we come to the band's fourth albums, Metallica's And Justice for All in 1988 and Megadeth's Rust in Peace in 1990. While the production is lacking, musically Metallica is exploring into progressive metal territory, with songs featuring multiple sections, odd time signatures, tempo shifts, gear changes, lapses, decelerations, and abrupt halts. This was Metallica essentially trying to show off what they could do as musicians. Rust in Peace, on the other hand, has amazing production and also has progressive traits, with multiple sections, shifting time signatures, and intricate guitar performances. The only difference is Rust in Peace is a shorter album in general. Both of these albums are flat-out masterpieces, and while each band's first three albums were a slow rise in popularity from the underground, each band's fourth album sold quickly and saw them headline across the country. 1991 saw the release of the Black Album, an album that saw Metallica deliberately simplify their sound with shorter and more accessible songs. Like I've said before, Metallica felt they did the old long song progressive thrash metal formula to death, and they wanted to broaden their horizons for the sake of creating something new. And it was a huge departure from their prior work. But naturally, while many fans who loved the underground thrash style were pissed off, the more mainstream radio-friendly sound attracted millions of new fans, and it remains their highest-selling album of all time. Now, of course, it was around this time that a lot of thrash metal fans would all say, oh, Metallica sold out because they went soft, and they're making pop-sounding metal. What's going on? This isn't Master of Puppets! Fuck! And surprisingly, some fans shifted from Metallica's fan base to Megadeth's fan base because they said, yeah, Megadeth is going to stay true to the roots, man. They're never going to play like pussies. Megadeth will never sell out, man. Yeah! And what did Megadeth do in 1992 with Countdown to Extinction? The exact same thing that the Black Album did. I'm not joking. Countdown to Extinction, released in 1992, also expanded the sound to include much more melody and mid-tempos to their traditional sound. They stripped down the sound to make it simpler and more accessible. They did it because of the Black Album. Megadeth's Nick Menza even said, Metallica has definitely opened the doors for other bands to step through. We're obviously the next band to step through that doorway. So Megadeth saw how much exposure that Metallica was getting through their release of the Black Album. So they're pretty much like, well, hey, we want in too. Who could blame Megadeth? Who could blame anyone? I mean, it is a music business after all. This is how people are making a living. And I'm not saying either album is bad. They both have amazing songs that stand out to this day. What both of these albums did was completely bridge the gap between those who love the rhythmic feel of heavy metal and a lot of extreme forms of music, as opposed to the people who preferred simpler stuff and more catchy stuff to listen to. Metallica and Megadeth were making songs that were still heavy, but catchy. And as much as a lot of die-hard metal fans that say true metal, blah blah blah, catchy songs are what sell. It is just a necessary evil of the music business. But a lot of times when this happens, a lot of fans will end up discovering the band's back catalog, enjoying the back catalog as much as they enjoyed the current catchy album, and then they become diehard fans. I know, because I'm one of them. While Metallica was still busy touring for the Black Album, Megadeth released Euthanasia in 1994. Euthanasia was once again more of a traditional heavy metal album. Following the footsteps of Countdown to Extinction, while still including songs that were quite heavy, the speed and thrash metal was very scarce at best. While successful in its own light and attracting more listeners as seen as disappointing to those who wanted the old thrash style, Metallica followed up in 1996 with Load, and Load continued their stylistic departure from the 80s even more, incorporating more of a blues rock sound in some of the songs, including a ballad that had a country edge. If that didn't piss a lot of fans off, it was the change in image with the haircuts and the artsy publicity photos that came along with it. Load and Euthanasia were both albums that each band wanted to continue exploring. 1997 saw Cryptic Writings and Reload. Not much to say. Both of these albums had the stylistic exploration, but also contained a few speed metal songs to give the thrash metal fans some hope. Now, whether you like the traditional heavy metal sound from Cryptic Writings, or you actually like the more hard rock bluesy sound from Reload, completely up to the listener. In 1999, Megadeth released Risk, an album that many fans say that Megadeth was at their lowest. Here, Megadeth attempted to make an album that completely crossed over into hard rock territory, and according to many fans and critics, they failed miserably. Megadeth got a lot of backlash, and this backlash caused Dave to start writing songs that was seen as more of a return to the classic Megadeth sound. And this trend began with the release of The World Needs a Hero in 2001, before the band disbanded temporarily in 2002. Metallica would release a collection of covers and a symphonic live album to close out the 90s, but their next official studio release didn't arrive until 2003. Saint Anger. Well, would you look at that, folks? Each band has an 8th album that was seen as a big failure. What? You heard it here. After recovering from a devastating arm injury, Dave Mustaine reformed Megadeth in 2004 and continued releasing album after album and material that has been much better received as a whole. Albums like Endgame, 13, and Dystopia have continued Megadeth's success throughout the 21st century and has kept Megadeth relevant in the world of heavy metal. Metallica, after a period of heavy touring and writing and recording an album at a pace they were comfortable with, released Death Magnetic in 2008 to heavy fanfare and praise. While not as amazing as their 1980 albums, it was an album that sounded like the missing link between Justice and the Black Album, and I personally knew many fans who hated the direction in the 90s but still welcomed this album with open arms, and still enjoyed going to see them on tour. Once more, Metallica were kings of what they did, and even though it's been nearly a decade since, fans are still patiently awaiting the release of their 10th studio album as of this video. So there you have it, folks. I have just given you a side-by-side comparison of the band's key albums in their first 20 or something years in their history, and what have we discovered? That the band's histories have been very similar. Yes, Metallica was more commercially successful in the album sales and the concert tours, but that didn't mean Megadeth was trying their hardest to catch up. Both of these bands had amazing, groundbreaking, influential thrash albums of the 1980s, had their most successful album be a result of them expanding into a simplified, more traditional mainstream sound in 1991 and 1992, respectively, and then having what are considered average albums at best throughout the mid to late 90s, only for their 8th album to be considered huge failures, according to many critics and fans. So, you're going to tell me, well, Metallica were a bunch of sellouts because they changed their music style. They stopped playing Master of Puppets. Then you got to include Megadeth and say, and they stopped writing Rust in Peace, because Countdown to Extinction was their answer to Metallica's Black Album. So, yes, you should include Megadeth in that same sentence. If Metallica sold out for making the Black Album, then Megadeth sold out for making Countdown to Extinction. A lot of bands will make an album that strips down their sound and simplifies it, or tries something that is popular at the time. Don't even get me started on Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Slayer. A lot of bands did this throughout their history. I love Iron Maiden and Slayer and Judas Priest, but they did things that Metallica are also guilty of. But no. Metallica are the only sellouts on this planet. I call bullshit. So when it comes to the rivalry between Metallica and Megadeth, I just showed you that their musical outputs and their paths stayed relatively the same. And at this point, the musical output is all that should matter anyway. Between all the back and forth comments and them yapping at each other, the bottom line is this rivalry stemmed because Dave Mustaine was always affected by the fact that he got fired by Metallica. He didn't like to see his former bandmates achieve breakthrough success that nobody thought that they would achieve. And yes, even though Megadeth was successful in their own light, Dave Mustaine never liked being number 2 in that aspect. And it took a while for both bands to realize, saying, you know, instead of fighting each other and doing all these press release comments toward each other, why don't we look at the world that we created together? Both of these bands are 2 of the most successful hard rock and heavy metal bands of all time. They are 2 of the big 4 of thrash metal. They are some of the most influential artists, period. And sure, while Metallica got the success, through it all, whether Dave Mustaine was in Metallica or whether he was in Megadeth, he was always part of the success. There was some controversy surrounding the release of Some Kind of Monster, which documented the period up to the release of Saint Anger. The documentary featured a 2001 meeting between Lars and Dave, who at this point had appeared to want to bury the hatchet towards his former bandmates, while still expressing his bitterness over the events from 18 years prior to that point. The controversy was simply because Dave didn't want the footage to be included, but he did sign a release that gave the filmmakers the rights to include it. He said he felt betrayed and felt the film featured him in an unflattering manner, and said it was the final straw towards him never reconciling with the band. Lars, in response, said, "So put these three facts down. He was in our band for a year, he never played on a Metallica official release, and it was 22 years ago. It's pretty absurd that it can be that big of a deal." I, having owned the DVD, having watched that film many times, I don't see Dave Mustaine in that clip in an unflattering manner. I see him as a guy who genuinely wanted his friends back. He was showing a vulnerable side of him, which was something that he rarely showed. He acknowledges his alcoholism. He called it the disease in the interview. And he expresses how he felt about the whole Metallica versus Megadeth thing. So no, I don't think the interview was unflattering him at all. I saw him as a guy really wanting to reach his hand out to Lars and say, hey, let's work towards burying the hatchet in all this. Eventually, they did reconcile. And we can only hope that maybe there can be a dream tour where there's a Metallica Megadeth world tour. Whether you like one band or the other, it's irrelevant at this point. If you have a reason to hate Lars or Dave outside of this whole rivalry, then power to you. But when it comes to attacking one band while defending the other and treating the other band like they're gods, I have 3 words for you. Get over it. Please like and subscribe for more Coyote rants, movie reviews, then and nows, and animation. What?
Hey, did you know that there's a new Kids Bop CD? Why aren't you talking about it yet?
I'll tell you what, watch my animations and comment on them. Maybe I'll consider doing Kids Bop a little early. I'm Desert Coyote 22, and I'll see you later.